Okay, good morning, everyone. It is Rabbi Akiva Males, and it is Wednesday. It is February the 10th, and we're getting ready for Parshas Mishpatim. I'm going to bring up the share screen, and we'll get started. There we go. All right. Good morning, everyone. Rabbi Akiva Males, we're looking forward to sharing some Divrei Torah with you on Parshas Mishpatim. I hope some of these may be Divrei Torah you've seen before. Some of them could be new to you. I hope these will be things you'll find interesting. I know that I sure did this week. Let's see. So Parshas Mishpatim begins. Let's start right at the top. The Parsha begins, Vela Mishpatim asher tasim lifneim. These are the ordinances you shall set before you. Now we're going to start talking about the Eved Ivri. That is the indentured servant. This is someone who's a member of Klal Yisrael, is a full member of the Jewish people. And for either through theft, this person has stolen and does not have the money to pay back what he has stolen. So the court will sell him as an Eved into indentured servitude to be able to make money to pay off the losses that he's incurred from the people he's stolen money from. Another way that a person could become an Eved Ivri is if the person is penniless and the person has tried every avenue in order to make a living and he's just not, he can sell himself into indentured servitude and be an Eved Ivri. It's a misnomer to say this is a slave. I'm using specifically the term indentured servitude because this person has to be treated exceedingly well. We'll see. So again, the pasuk tells us as follows. Vela mishpatim, and these are the ordinances asher tasim lifneim that you should put before you and the Jewish people. Kisikna aved ivri sheish shanim yavod. If someone does enter into a relationship with an indentured servant, meaning that they hire them, so how long of a term is this for? It's for 6 years. Sheish shanim yavod. They should work for a term of 6 years. Uvashvi'isi etzela chavshi chinam. And in the 7th year, the Shemitah year, that's the sabbatical year, that's when he goes free without charge. The person is free to go. Gimel, im begapo yavo begapo yetzei. If he came in alone, he goes out alone. In Bali Shahu, if this person is a married man, I lost the place, then when that 7th year rolls around, not only does he go free, but of course his wife goes free too. She doesn't stay behind as a servant of any way. This man entered into indentured servitude. When his term comes to an end, whoever is with him, whether it's his wife, they go. Dalad. And if, let's say, when this fellow was an Eved Ivri, if his master paired him up with a Shifcha Kananis, so with a non-Jewish maidservant, so then even though this fellow goes free, so Ha'isha Viladeh Tiel Adoneha, that Shifcha Kananis, the non-Jewish maidservant, and the children that he bore with her, those remain behind. This fellow goes out alone. That really is a subject for an entirely another shir. That's not really what we're going to touch on today. Hey, Vim Amari Amaro Eved, if this Jewish indentured servant says, after 6 years of serving, it's now the Shemitah year, the 7th year where he should be going free, and he says, I want to stay. Ahavti es Adoni. I love my master. I had a really good deal here, 3 hot meals, a roof over my head. He took good care of me. I don't want to be independent. I want to stay. Esishti vespanai, or his wife and his kids, that would be, again, in the event that he was paired up with a Shifcha Kananis, with a non-Jewish maidservant. Lo etzei chavshi, I'm not interested in going free. I'd rather stay behind as an Eved Ivri. So then what? Vav, v'gisho adonav Elohim. This is another one that, again, it's not referring to God. Then the master brings him before judges, v'gisho el adelas, and he'll be brought to the door, o el mezuzah, or to the doorpost. V'ratza adonav es azno b'martzeya. His master will bore a hole, it will pierce his ear using an awl, that kind of tool. V'avadoli olam, and will serve him forever. Now, forever doesn't mean for eternity. It means until Yovel, until the Jubilee year, which would be after 7 Shemitah, after 7 sabbatical cycles. So year 49 going into 50, that's known as the Jubilee year. So an Eved Ivri, the longest he could stay in a relationship with a master would be for 49 years until he would hit a Yovel year. So if, let's say, last year was a Yovel year, this fellow now sells himself or gets sold as an Eved Ivri. In the first sabbatical year, the fellow wants to stay behind as an Eved Ivri. The max that he can stay would be till the next Yovel. Okay, that's what we're told about the Eved Ivri. I want to share some fascinating sources with you about the Eved Ivri. The first one, let's take a look at Rashi on 21:3. So what did the pasuk say in Chaf Aleph Gimel? The pasuk said, "Im begapo yavo, begapo yetzei." If he came in alone, he goes out alone. In Bali Show, if this guy was married, so he brought his Jewish wife into this arrangement with him, so then v'yatza ishto imo, then the wife goes out. So look at Rashi. Rashi says v'yatza ishto imo, his wife goes out with him once the seventh year comes. Now, who brought her in that now the Torah needs to tell us that she should go out because it's the sabbatical year? Elamagir HaKasav, what's the Torah teaching us? Shakona Eved Ivri, if someone enters into a monetary arrangement with an indentured Jewish servant, that they're going to be their Eved Ivri for the next 6 years until the seventh year, Shakona Eved Ivri, someone who buys or enters into that financial obligation to an Eved Ivri, Chayav b'mezonos ishto uvanav. Not only does he have to provide for that Eved Ivri, but if that Eved Ivri had a wife and kids, the master now has to provide for them too. That's what the pasuk's telling us. If he came in single, he goes out single. In Bali Shahu, if he was married, and now the master had to provide for this guy's wife, then the wife goes, meaning the master now is done. He does not have to pay for the Eved Ivri's of food and board. He does not have to pay for the Eved Ivri's wife's food and board. But the whole 6 years that this Eved Ivri was with him, meaning from whenever he bought him until the Shemitah year, that whole time, not only was the master chayav, not only was he obligated to take care of the servant, for this Jewish servant, he also had to feed this fellow's wife and kids. So there's a lot of responsibility that comes along with entering into this financial arrangement with an Eved Ivri. It might not be as lucrative as it might seem on the surface. Let's look at this Ramban. Nachmanides wants to know, he wants to explore this idea that Rashi brought up. Rashi brought up this idea that if someone hires an Eved Ivri or enters into this financial arrangement with an Eved Ivri that'll take care of him for 6 years, he now has an obligation to take care of this guy's wife and kids. So Ramban wants to explain what's this based on. So let's see the Ramban together. Bottom of page 1. V'yatsa ishto imo. Then this fellow's wife goes out with him, because of Rashi. So he now quotes Rashi. Rashi says, who brought in this guy's wife that the Torah now has to tell us that she should go out in the Shemitah year? Elamagid, so what's the Torah teaching us? Shakon Eved Ivri, if someone hires an Eved Ivri, or someone enters into a financial arrangement with this Eved Ivri, Chayav b'mzonos ishto uvanav, he also has to provide for this guy's Jewish wife and kids. That's what it's teaching us. And Medrash Chachamim, who Rashi didn't make this up on his own, he was quoting a Medrash, the Mechilta. Okay, so now Ramban wants to explain where does this obligation come from. So let's see the Ramban together. Ben nira be'inai. Here's how it appears in my eyes. Shehu nichnas b'makom abal. When the master enters into a financial arrangement with an Eved Ivri, you might call it he's buying the Eved Ivri, or he's entering into this fiscal arrangement that that the Eved Ivri is going to be his indentured servant for the next 6 years, and he's going to have to provide for him. The master now fills his shoes as being his husband, the husband of this guy's wife and kids. Meaning, if let's say this Eved Ivri was single, he's only got responsibilities to the Eved Ivri. Eved Ivri works for him, and he covers what this guy's costs, what his expenses are, what his needs are. But if this Eved Ivri has a wife and kids, we're told that the master has to take care of them as well. Where does that come from? So the Ramban says, "Vanir beinai." It appears to me, "Shu nichnas b'makom abal." The master now assumes the responsibilities of being husband. Ki chamla Torah ala isha v'abanim. The Torah had compassion. The Torah had mercy on this wife and on the kids whose husband/father just sold himself into this arrangement of being an indentured servant. Shechayayim tuluyim lahem minegem mitzapim lidei abal. In the ancient world, the wife and kids didn't really have much of an opportunity to earn a living for themselves. Who was the breadwinner? Was the husband. But now that the husband sold himself as an Eved Ivri, and part of the arrangement is whatever profits this guy makes in his work go to who? Not to his wife and kids. They go to his master. He's paying off his master. In other words, the master bought him so this guy could pay down his debt. But now whatever profits this guy is making while he's working as an indentured servant goes to the master. So who's taking care of the wife and kids now? So that's what the Ramban's suggesting. The master, the Torah says to the master, you entered into this relationship. You now have to step into the shoes of the husband. This guy's got a wife. He's got kids. Someone has to take care of them. And the Torah says, that's you. Now that this fellow, now that their husband / father is an indentured servant, who is the wife and kids turning to for help? They're turning to this master. So the master has a relationship to them like the husband. He has to take care of their financial needs. Now that their husband / father sold himself as an indentured servant, these fellows, the wife and kids, they should be lost in anguish. Therefore, the Torah commands the master, since he is taking the wages of this indentured servant, right? He bought him, he entered into this arrangement for 6 years with him so the guy could pay off his debt. But again, that means on a day-to-day basis, he's taking this fellow's wages. So now it's his responsibility to step into the husband / father's shoes and take care of his wife and kids. This entire arrangement, this is an act of compassion, because God cares about this indentured servant's wife and kids. And not just he's caring about the wife and kids, he also cares about the Eved, because this Eved would be heartbroken. He was in such a bad financial fix that not only did he have to sell himself into indentured servitude, but now he, in a sense, abandoned his wife and kid, and his guilt is killing him that his wife and kids don't have anyone providing for them, and they're going to be forlorn. So now this Eved is going to fall to pieces, and he's going to fall apart, and he'll die in pain. So the Torah says, no, this is supposed to all be a rehabilitative process. The whole concept of Eved Ivri, of indentured servitude, is trying to get this guy set up on his feet and get back on track, whether he was a thief and now we want him to be in a Jewish home to see how to live like a responsible member of society. Or let's say the guy was just broke and this is his last opportunity to try to fix his financial wagon. We don't want him to fall apart. We don't want his kids and wife to fall apart. We don't want him to be an emotional wreck that he had to abandon them. Therefore, the Torah has mercy on them and on this Eved. While he's working in the house of a stranger, he shouldn't fall apart, fall to pieces, that he's abandoned his wife and kids, and he feels like, oh my God, what kind of irresponsible human being am I?
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
Who's buying the Eved Ivri? Is it somebody that the Eved Ivri owes money to directly, or just some random person says, yeah, feel the need to become, a slave owner and then really a master myself?
The answer, a good question. The answer is it could work either ways. There's two ways a person becomes an Eved Ivri. One is that the person stole and does not have the money to pay back.
No, I'm wondering who has.
I know we'll get to there. So in the case of the thief, the court sells the fellow, and again, there's no relationship. It does not have to be the one he stole money from. It could be the one he stole money from, and now the court sells it to him and say, look, he owes you $7,000. We've figured out that the type of work this guy could perform for you for the next 6 years will be worth $7,000. So he'll live in your house, you'll take care of him, he'll work for you, and he'll pay you back. That's one way. If it's not the guy you stole money from, it could be a total stranger who's willing to take on that responsibility because he says, I need work done, I need a farmhand, I'll take care of this guy, and I'll pay the court $7,000, and that'll pay back the one that he owes money to. In the other cases, not a thief, but someone who was in bad financial situations and sold himself into slavery or into this indentured servitude. So it could go either way as well. It could either go that he's selling himself to the party he owes money to the one he's indebted to, or if, let's say, that fellow says, I'm not interested, I don't need your skills. All you know how to do is put shoes on horses, and I don't own horses. I don't need you. So what does the guy do? He sells himself out to a racetrack, and they're willing to take him on as an indentured servant, and they'll pay the $7,000 so he could pay back his debtors. But now the owners of that racetrack have a responsibility to him to feed and clothe him and also take care of his wife and kids. Whoever is going to walk into that relationship of being the master, the Adon, now has to take care of this fellow's wife and kids. And where does that responsibility come from? Total chemla, because this is asking the master to take on a whole new financial package that they never needed. But the Torah says that's the breaks. there's no such thing. We're not going to let a person fall to pieces, whether that's the Eved. We're not going to let him lose his mind because he's abandoned his wife and kids. And we're not going to let the wife and kids fall apart. There was no social system, social welfare system to take care. So therefore, if you want to buy an Eved Ivri, this is part of the package. That's how the Ramban is learning this. It was a total act of chemla, of compassion on the part of Hashem. Okay, let's just continue in this Ramban. I hope that answered. I think that answered the question. Let's.
I think it's a total act of mercy on the part of the person buying the Eved Ivri, because it's really a tremendous responsibility. It's because
for sure. But who
it's
mandated
like,
this?
why would you buy an Eved Ivri?
100%. But again, it's Hashem's mandating this, saying if you want an Eved Ivri, you want this guy's skills, and you're willing to buy him for $7,000 for the next 6 years. That's great, and you'll pay off his debt. But you're also going to have to take care of his wife and kids. There's no escaping that. Now, again, when you're living in a society, it might be a great deal. This person could say, if I had to find work, I can't find honest help, I can't someone who has that skills, it's worth it for me to do that. That's what the person might say. But ultimately, it's a decision the person's going to have to make. But he's forced to do this. If you want to buy this person as an Eved Ivri, you have to take care of his wife and kids. Where does that come from? Because the Chemla, Hashem says, I have compassion on them. So if you want to enter into this relationship, understand this is going to be your responsibility. This is how the Ramban is learning this. But this Chemla is, again, that's what he says. Ki Chemla haTorah la'isha v'abanim. The Torah is saying, Hashem says, I take compassion. We're not going to separate them. You're going to have to take care of the wife and kids as well. Now he continues, Aval at then 2 lines from the bottom. Since the way the world works is that a husband takes care of his wife and his kids when they're still young, Tziva Hakel, God commanded, Barachamav, because God is so compassionate, Lios Tekuna Ka'av Rachamon Lahem, Av Hakona Ka'av Harachman Lahem. That whoever is the master, whoever's going to buy this person, whoever's going to enter into this fiscal relationship of a master-servant relationship, you also must take care of this man's wife and small children. The Kavanas Chachamim, and now when the sages said that Ishto Ubanav, he says, don't think that just means male children. He just clarifies, Kavanas Chachamim, but Banav, that means Habanim Va'banos. Banav means plural children. It doesn't just mean male children. It means the children, whether they're boys or girls at a young age, before they could work for themselves and be independent. It's the responsibility of the Adam. I just thought this is a fascinating Ramban. I know it's something that I don't think I fully thought about before this year, looking at this. I don't think I fully thought this matter through. We always think through, an Eved Ivri. But I never thought through, okay, so what happens to the wife and kids during those 6 years that this fellow's an Eved Ivri? Who's taking care of them? Rashi tells us it's the master. Well, where did that responsibility come from? So that's where the Ramban fleshes this out a little. And he says, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Rachamava Kol Masav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has compassion on all of his creations. And the last thing Hashem wants is to see that through this institution of Eved Ivri, you're going to have this Eved Ivri becomes broken because he can't take care of his wife and kids. And the last thing he wants is the wife and kids to become broken and to fall apart. So that's where this institution comes from, that the master, whoever enters into this fiscal arrangement, must take care. The Torah mandates that he must take care of the wife and kids. I thought that was very interesting.
His wife and kids look like they are also being punished. That they are also
the wife and
they
kids
are punished by
How are they punished? How are they punished? The wife and kids.
It doesn't matter. They are not free as they were before.
Who said they're not free? There's no restrictions on the wife and kids. They're being taken care of. Now that this husband is either a thief, so that was his no one to blame but himself, or bad financial management or whatever he did to fall into bad shape. This fellow had to enter into an Eved Ivri relationship. Now the Torah is not punishing the wife and kids. To the contrary, the Torah is saying the master has to take care of them. Nowhere does it says the wife and kids have to work for the master. It says the master has to take care of them. He now has to clothe the wife and kids. He has to feed them. He has to make sure they have a roof over their head. Again, he's not putting them up in the Hilton, but he has to provide them with a roof, and he's going to have to feed them as well. They're not being punished. If anything, they're being looked after.
So instead of taking to the house of the master, can they stay by themselves? I mean,
if they have a house, but this guy's in such financial ruin I can't imagine he has rent to pay. He wouldn't be selling himself as an Eved Ivri if he did. If, let's say, they had a house, then okay, they could stay there and he could just send them whatever they need for food, whatever that minimum amount is that you need to pay someone for food. If they were living in his place, he could send it there. I doubt that would happen. If this guy's in such bad financial shape that he had to sell himself as an Eved Ivri, I would assume the wife and kids are coming with him. They don't have a place to live. Let's see this Cheskuni. There's two fascinating concepts from the Cheskuni I want to share with you. The Torah says that the Eved Ivri is only supposed to stay in that relationship for 6 years, and in the 7th year, Shemitah year, the sabbatical year, should go free. But the Torah does offer a clause. If the Eved Ivri decides, I want to stay in this life of being an indentured servant, he's allowed to stay up to the Yovel year. So the max would be, again, for until year 49. What does he need to do? He's got to get his ear pierced. He's got to get his ear pierced and the delis or the mezuzah at the door or at the doorpost of his master. I saw two fascinating concepts from the Cheskuni I want to share with you. The Cheskuni wants to know, what's the concept of this pierced ear? You know, where does this come from? What's the significance? What's the symbolism? And he has such a beautiful, rational explanation. Look what he says. V'ratzah adonav. So the master pierces his ear. So what's the point? The first idea. She'im yivrach mibalav. Let's say this guy would ever run away. Ritzias azno tochiach alav shehu avdo. Having this pierced ear, he will be able to prove that's my Eved. And this is back in the day before photography and fingerprints. So this guy ran away and he says, look, we entered, the court said that he's my Eved. I have this relationship with him for 6 years. Now the guy tried to run away. I paid off his debt and now he booked. Now he left. Now he got on the next boat to Mississippi. What do you mean? I just paid off his debt. He owes me 6 years of work. So let's say he gets arrested, and now the court says to him, well, prove to me he's your Eved. There's no pictures, there's no fingerprints. How are you going to prove to me he's your Eved? Oh, he says the pierced ear. How? Stand him up right against my door, and look what matches. He's the same exact height as the hole in my door. Where did the Torah say, how do you pierce this ear? You don't go to the kiosk in the mall and get his ear pierced. You pierce his ear against the mezuzah, against the doorpost of my house, or against the door of my house. What is that going to do? That's going to be evidence that if this guy should ever run away, and I say, it's not fair, I paid his debt off, he owes me work. So Basin will bring him to my house. He'll stand up against the doorpost, against the door, and see, does the hole match up? Look at that. It's a perfect fit. You're right. He's your Eved. And also, the Adon, the master, let's say his Eved Ivri died, and now the police just arrested a different runaway Eved Ivri. He can't claim, okay, that's mine, because what happens when they bring him to his house? They'll say, prove it, and look, it's not going to match up. Unless it's my Eved, it's not going to match up. Someone's going to be taller, someone's going to be lower. The door might be taller, the doorpost might be taller, the Eved might be taller, whatever it is, something's not going to match up. So the Cheskuni has a very rational explanation about what's this idea of specifically piercing the ear against my door and against my doorpost. What's that about? So that's what he says. This will be the ultimate proof as to who's the master and who's the Eved in this relationship. I thought
Rabbi, I'm confused here.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry to be breaking in so much, but I understood that the piercing of the ear is only if he doesn't want to go free.
Correct. We're talking about after the Shemitah year. If this fellow does not want to go free, then the guy could agree that, okay, I'll pierce the ear and he can stay on La'olam.
So why is he running away? He's not running away. In other words,
he might regret it. After a couple years, his pen pal tells him, I've got a great business venture. What are you doing as an Eved? I got an investment opportunity. You can manage, all of these funds. You don't need to live.
After his indentured servitude, is he not free to go? Like, okay,
not once he's pierced that ear. Once he's pierced that ear, he's now committed to be there till Yovel.
Okay.
After Sheish Shanim, he was free to go at Shemitah. But if this decide, Ahavti es ishti, I do not want to leave, I want to continue this life, and it's a commitment now until Yovel. So if this guy would run away now,
right, I didn't understand that. Okay.
Yes, and now the master could say, I invested in this guy. I paid off his debt. He decided he wanted to stay. he's not allowed to do that. And then, so if they catch him, he comes back, and now there's proof that's what this Cheskuni is pointing out. I thought this was very cool. I never saw something like this before.
Well, what if he wants to run away before the 6th year?
So then there's no way to prove it this way, because again, he's not going to get his ear pierced until after the Shemitah. So if he would run away, you're right. If he would run away within the first 6 years, there's no way to prove it. This whole idea that Cheskuni is saying about the pierced ear is if the fellow would run away after he's decided, I want to stay. That's meaning until the Yovel. All right, let's see the next Cheskuni. This is also very cool. He says another reason why pierce the ear. What's the idea of piercing the ear just in general? So look what he says on this second to last line in that first paragraph. This whole institution of piercing the ear only applies to an Eved Ivri, not by an Eved Kanani. Why? Why just by an Eved Ivri? Hainu Taima, what's the reason? Shelo yitu bo ha'olam. We don't want anyone to make a mistake when they start seeing these in a relationship of an Eved Adon, a master-servant relationship. We don't want anyone to think Lomar Kananihu. Oh, it must be this guy's a Kanani. Must be he's not Jewish. And the question is Yichus, and the kid's Yichus. When he sees that he's been in this relationship until Yovel, and it's very uncommon. You could have an Eved Ivri until Shemitah. Yeah, people see that all the time. But now here it is. This is a multi-generational Eved. It's going on for 49 years. It could be in the family now for 2 generations, even 3 generations. People might forget, what's this guy's background? They may assume, oh, he must be an Eved Kanani. Why else is he still here? So he says, no, the earring is an indicator, the pierced ear is an indication. If you're going to stick around for so long, we don't want people to get confused and think, oh, he must be an Eved Kanani. Seeing that pierced ear is going to remind everyone, no, he's an Eved Ivri who decided to stay until Yovel. Again, another very cool explanation, which I had never seen before. Very rational, is that why this would be necessary. I thought that was very, very interesting. Let's see one more Cheskuni. This one really knocked my socks off. So in the next paragraph, Martseya, he says you got to use an awl. An awl is a leather working tool. So it doesn't say take him to a kiosk in the mall and get this really nice ear piercing. Use an awl, this implement called a Martseya, an awl. What's the point? So look at this Cheskuni. Shamati Midrash. I heard there a certain Midrash exists. That why did Hashem use an awl, a Martseya? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Ani gazarti al Yisrael, shibud shel arba me'el shana. At the Bris Bein Absarim in Parshas Lech Lecha, when I made that covenant between the parts with Avram Avinu, I initially said that they should be avadim, Bnei Yisrael should be slaves for 400 years. But afterwards, dalagti esaketz b'shvilam. I pushed the envelope, and I pushed for the end to come quicker for them. Katsarti es hashibud, and I made the slavery end earlier. It was only 210 years. Redu, Reish Daled Vav, was 210 years. That's how much it was. So I pushed it from 400 to 210. V'halach zen, what did this guy do? V'shibed es atzmo, and this guy voluntarily put himself to be into an indentured servant until Yovel. So what a chutzpah. I did such a tova for Klal Yisrael that I cut it down from 400 years to 210, and he willingly puts himself into a slave relationship for longer. Yirtza b'chli, so his ear should be pierced with a tool. Shehu ola gematria daled meos. His ear should be pierced. If we got to do an ear piercing already for one of the reasons above, what tool should be used for that? Something that the gematria, the numerical value, comes out to 400. V'hu martseya, what tool is that? A martseya, an awl. Now look, I got it, the gematria worked out for you. Mem is 40, Resh is 200, Tzadi is 90, Ayin is 70. Add it up. 40 and 200 is 240. And a 90 will bring you to 330. Add a 70, you got 400. Look at that. How cool is that? How cool is that? You've got Martseya, it's 400. That is the tool. You've got to use the Martseya. Why? Because it's like you're giving the person a slap upside the head. Saying, what a chutzpah. Hashem doesn't want Bnei Yisrael to be avadim. And how do I know? Prove it to you. He cut down our servitude period from being originally destined to be 400 to 210. So what do you see? Hashem doesn't want us to be an Eved. And what does this guy do? He willingly, okay, the first 6 years he had to be an Eved. He was broke. He stole, whatever it was. But after that, to willingly be in a life of Avdos, Hashem doesn't want that. What's going to drive the lesson home and to give him that slap upside the head? Having his ear pierced with what? A martseya. That's a gematria of 400. That should remind the fellow, you went against Hashem's wishes. What a fascinating medrash. Was not aware of that before. Okay, I want to share something else with you. That's amazing. Rashi says, "V'ratza Adonai es aznav b'martzeya." His ear gets pierced with a martzeya, with an awl. So it says here, hayimanis, which ear? It should be his right ear. Okay, and Rashi says where Gemara learns that from. So now Rashi says, "Umara ozen lartzeya mikol sharavarim shebaguf." Granted, you've got to pierce something. Hashem decides if you choose to be an Eved lo lam, to be an Eved for this long period, so something's got to get pierced. But why the ear? Why not the lip? Why not the nose? Why the ear? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai taught, Ozen zos, this ear, Shesham al Har Sinai, which heard on Har Sinai, lo signov, you should not steal. And what did this guy do? He went ahead and stole. Because remember, we said there's two ways a guy becomes an Eved Ivri. One, he stole and doesn't have the funds to pay it up. The other way is he was just broke. So here, most likely, or in many cases, why does the person become an Eved Ivri? Because he stole. So that ear that heard lo signov, in the 10 Commandments, it said don't steal. And what did he do? He steal? Tirza, it should be pierced. So that's the first shot. The first shot, why not pierce his lips? Why not pierce his nose? Why the ear? Because when he stole, he went against what his ears heard, what a Jew's ears, every Jew, our neshama stood at Sinai, and our ears, so to say, heard what signal, and a person stole, so it's like getting a patch on the ear. Here it was that you stole. But what if the guy did not steal? He became an Eved Ivri just because he was broke. So there's another reason why to pierce the ear. Ozen shesham al Har Sinai, the ear that heard at Har Sinai, kili b'nei Yisrael avadim, that the Jewish people are my avadim, they're my servants. And then he defied that by going out and finding a master for himself in earth, in flesh and blood. Tirza, that ear should be pierced. So Rashi is quoting the Gemara that gives two answers. Why, if this guy decides to be a long-term Eved, why not pierce his nose? Why not pierce his lips? Why specifically piercing his ears? And there's many more options than the nose and the lips. All you got to do is drive by any of these body piercing shops and they'll find a gazillion places they could have pierced. So why is it his ear that specifically is getting pierced? So the Gemara that Rashi's quoting tells us two answers. If he was an Eved, if he was a thief, he went against what his ears heard at Sinai of Losigno, so that's why his ear gets pierced. And if he went and the reason why he was an Eved is because he sold himself, he also went against what he heard. When Hashem said, Kili b'nei Yisrael avadim, that the Jews are my servants, he went against that. That's why he gets pierced. So that's why his ear gets pierced. That's very cool. That's a Rashi I always knew. All right. Now we're going to see one more Rashi, just real quick. He says, "Va'avadoli olam." He says, after having his ears pierced, then he becomes an Eved forever. So Rashi again quotes the Gemara that says it doesn't literally mean forever. It means Ada Yovel, until the Jubilee. I'm just drinking a water. I'll say Shahakal. So let's see something fascinating. I always saw this Rashi and it never caught my eye. But I want to explain to you a problem that all the commentaries on Rashi ask. Let's take a look at the Aseret Hadibros. The Aseret Hadibros, Rashi just said that it said he heard on Sinai, lo signo, you shouldn't steal. And this guy stole. That's why he became an Eved Ivri, so he should get the ear pierced. Let's take a look back at what Chazal tell us about lo signo. So I have here is what the Chumash tells us at the Aseret Hadibros. We just read this last week in Yisro. It's in Shmos 20, so it's Perachaf, it's Pasuk Yud Gimel 13. It says, Lo sirtzach, you shouldn't murder. Lo sinaf, you shouldn't commit adultery. Lo signov, you should not steal. Lo sana berachad shakar, you shouldn't bear false witness against your neighbor. Okay, true. This guy definitely heard lo signov at Har Sinai. But what does lo signov mean? So look at Rashi. Rashi's quoting the Gemara. Lo signov. What does it mean when it says in Aseret Adibros, don't steal? The gonev nefashos hakasam medaber. The Torah is talking about kidnapping, stealing another human being. It's not talking about money. It's not talking about financials. Lo signovu, when the Torah says later in Vayikra, you shouldn't steal, that's begonev mammon. That's talking about stealing money. Oh, ella zebegonev mammon. Or maybe you might make the argument, where do you get that from? Maybe here in that Aseret Adibros, when it says lo signov, it's talking about money. Ulahalan, and later in Vayikra, when it says lo signovu, maybe over there it's talking about kidnapping, gonev nefashos. So the Gemara says, I'll prove it to you that in the Aseret Adibros is not money. So it says, Amrit davar alame minyano. Look, you have to look. All these matters, one is clearly related and learned out from the other. Ma lo tirtzach. Look at lo tirtzach. It's in the same pasuk. Don't murder. Lo tinaf. Don't commit adultery. That's midaber b'davar shechayaven aleihem misas beistin. Those are clearly, the first two items listed in that pasuk are clearly talking about items that if they were to be violated, they carry a death penalty. Don't murder carries a death penalty. Don't commit adultery carries a death penalty. And then immediately it says, lo tignov, don't steal. So now if I'm questioning, well, what type of thievery is talking about in lo tignov? Af lo tignov, davar shechayav alav misas beistin. It must be the lo tignov that's in this pasuk is also talking about something which carries a death penalty, and the only type of thievery that carries a death penalty is kidnapping. So what the Gemara clearly tells us is that lo tignov, that's in the Aseret Adibros, is not talking about financial stealing. It's talking about kidnapping. If that's the case, we got a good question on Rashi. Let's back up. Rashi told us, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, what's the reason of all the parts of the body that can be pierced? Not the lips, not the nose. It's got to be the ear. Why? Ozen zos sheshamal har Sinai lo signov. That ear that heard on har Sinai, don't steal. V'halach v'ganav, and he went and stole, and now he doesn't have the money to pay it back. Tirtza, that ear should get pierced. 1 second. He heard on Sinai lo tignov, but what kind of geneva is that talking about? Money? No, that's talking about kidnapping. If that's the case, you're back to your original question. Why is the ear getting pierced? And don't tell me because he violated what he heard on Sinai. What I heard on Sinai had nothing to do with financial theft. That had nothing to do with that. It had to do with kidnapping. Good question. This question is asked by all the commentaries on Rashi's. I never saw it until this year, but the Mizrahi is the one who really brings it out. But you'll see someone earlier, Rishonim, asked it as well. So let's see the Mizrahi. Rav Eliyahu Mizrahi says, Ozen sheshama b'Sinai lo signov v'halach v'ganav. So this guy's ears heard at Sinai, don't steal. And what did he do? He went and stole. Tirtza, it should be pierced. The Mechilta, Rashi's quoting the Mechilta Medrash. V'yafal gav the high kra. And even though that pasuk of lo signov, b'gonev nefasha somer, it's talking about kidnapping. Below b'gonev mammon. It's not talking about financial thievery. As it's brought down in the Medrash, and also the Gemara, Rashi Zal. So he's asking our question: how does Rashi make any sense? Well, because this guy heard lo signov at Sinai, so that's why we pierce his ear. But what he heard had nothing to do with finances. Lo signov at Sinai was talking about kidnapping. So Yesh Lomar, here's his answer. Dachi Kamar, this is what it means. Ozen sheshama b'Sinai lo signov. This guy's ears at Har Sinai heard the prohibition of lo signov. But lo signov at Sinai, you're right. The actual type of Geneva was talking about was kidnapping. But all of the 10 commandments, also, they were umbrellas for categories that were beneath them. Included, you're right, the literal lo tignov that's in the Aseret Adibros is talking about kidnapping. But beneath it, what's in a subcategory underneath that is lo tignov of tignovu that has to do with money. Sharei kol Torah kula nechlelas b'Aseret Adibros. We have a tradition that all 613 mitzvahs that we have somehow or another are rooted in the Aseret Adibros. You can find a makor, you can find a basis for them in the Aseret Adibros. K'moshe kasav Rabbeinu Sajagon. Rabbeinu Sajagon has this famous idea that we always say, oh yeah, we got the Torah at Har Sinai. Is that true? Did we get the Torah at Har Sinai? We got the Aseret Adibros at Har Sinai. If I asked you how many mitzvahs did we get at Har Sinai, so I think all of us would say, yeah, we got the 613 mitzvahs at Har Sinai. Where? We got Aseret Adibros. we got 10 utterances. So Rabbeinu Sajagon has a very famous idea that, yes, you're right, we got 10 utterances at Har Sinai, but those 10 are comprehensive. And those 10, if you work hard, you can find a way that all 613 mitzvahs, both the positive commands and the negative prohibitions, all of them can find their way, find their basis, and find their roots in the Aseres HaDibros. So if that's the case, in a sense, a person did hear Lo Signov about finances, not to steal money at Har Sinai. You're right. The Lo Signov of the 10 Commandments is talking about financial thievery. However, the Lo Signovu that's talking about, Lo Signov in the Aseres HaDibros is talking about kidnapping. However, Lo Signovu that's talking about financial thievery is rooted in the Aseres HaDibros. It might not be expressly stated like kidnapping is, but it has its basis in the Aseres HaDibros. And therefore, you still can say about a person who stole monetary funds, and they did not have what to repay it, and they had to be sold as an Eved Ivri. And then this guy chose to stay as an Eved Ivri until Yovel. You can still say to him, you who heard Lo Signov at Har Sinai, and you chose to violate that, you should get your ear pierced. What do you mean? What I heard was talking about kidnapping. Yeah, the literal Lo Signov was talking about kidnapping, but Lo Signovu, which is talking about financial thievery, is nichlal. That's included as all the 613 mitzvahs are included in the Aseres HaDibros. Therefore, it's not a lie to say you heard that at Sinai too. The same way you could say to a person, you heard the prohibition about not cooking milk and meat together at Har Sinai. Where did I hear that? I only heard 10 commandments, and that's not one of the top 10. That's not the 10 commandments. No, but Rav Sajagon has a way of saying all 613 mitzvahs are rooted in the Aseres HaDibros in the sense we did hear the prohibition of not cooking milk and meat at Sinai too. That's how the Mizrahi wants to answer this. Now we'll see that Rishonim, the Moshe Zakanim, was one of the a collection of the work of the Baalei Tosos. They're bothered by this question also. So it's not just the Mizrahi and the later commentators on Rashi who had this question, but Rishonim were bothered by this. Let's see, top line in this Moshe Zakanim on page 3. Ach kasha, or was this page 4? Page 4. Ach kasha. Here's my problem. Lefia Tam Shomer Rav Shlomo, meaning Rashi. Here's the problem I have with Rashi. Mipnei sheshama lo signov, he heard lo signov, or mipnei sheshama kili b'nei Yisrael, or because he heard kili b'nei Yisrael, which is in Vayikra. Im kain yirtza mipam rishona sheganavo shemachar atzmo. He says, I got a better question. Moshe Zakanim asks, not necessarily what was bothering us with the Mizrahi. He says, I got a better question. My question is, why don't we make him get his ears pierced immediately, as soon as he sold as an Eved Ivri? Why are we waiting until he's decided to stay on until Yovel? Why don't we pierce his ears immediately? Because the only reason why a guy becomes an Eved Ivri is either because of thievery or because he was broke and he chose to be in an Avdus relationship. So immediately when he becomes an Eved Ivri, he's violated what his ear heard at Sinai. So why don't we pierce his ears immediately? Good question. So he says, V'yesh Lomar, here's his answer. Shema Shenirtza, truth be told, when a guy gets his ear pierced, Eino mamish mipnei agneva. It's not just because he stole. Shimkein mishanishba l'shav. If that were the case, if you ever caught a guy who swore falsely, or b'shara Aseres HaDibros, or violated anything else, chutz me onsho, aside from whatever punishment he gets, yirtza, you should also pierce his ears. Let's say you catch a guy who didn't properly honor his mother and father. Do we pierce his ears? You heard at Har Sinai, and you didn't do it, we're piercing your ear. Let's say we caught a guy violating Shabbos. Do we say, not only are we going to punish you, we're going to pierce your ears? We don't say something of that nature. So obviously, it doesn't mean because you stole, we pierce your ear. That can't be what it means. So he says, therefore, when we pierce this guy's ear, it's not just because he stole. You might make the argument, come on, he didn't really mean to ignore what he heard at Sinai. His Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, got the best of him, forced him to sin. Or because he was so broke, desperation caused him to sin. And similarly, if a guy didn't steal, he just sold himself as an Eved. Well, that was because he was in financial ruin. Mipnei dochko, Pam Rishona. The first time that this guy had to sell himself into Avdus, either because he stole, he could say, okay, his Yetzer Hara got the best of him, or the desperate circumstances forced him to steal. Or if a guy sold himself, financial ruin, machmas oni, that's why he sold himself. So we're not going to pierce his ear the first time he does this. But now 6 years have gone by. So we're in the sabbatical year and it's time to go home. And he doesn't want to. And now he can't blame it on, okay, my Yetzer Hara got the best of me. Or desperate times call for desperate measures. So I had to steal or I had to sell myself. He's in a much more comfortable place now. And now he's choosing to be an Eved. Mashma shenichale begneva. That implies you must not regret what you initially did that you stole. Because you don't want to go home. Or the gam came if the guy sold himself, what does that show? Who I didn't share to, you should also get pierced. You were destined to go home. You must not appreciate the fact that Hashem wants you to be a free person. The gam came don't know your so, and your master is giving you a severance package. Part of going home is getting a severance package. It says hanik taniklo. You're supposed to give the person a severance to go home after the 6 years, and you're not taking that. So what does that show? Either you're okay as a thief, because this wasn't just about, okay, desperate times I had to steal. You've got financial security now and you're still staying here. It must be you were okay stealing. You can't blame it on, okay, I was desperate, so I had to steal. Or the guy who sold himself, you can't blame it on the fact I was desperate, so I had to sell myself. You're not desperate now. 6 years have gone by. You paid off your debts. He gave you a severance package and you're still choosing to stay. That means you're okay with being an Eved. If that's the case, that's why you get your ear pierced. I thought that was very cool. Let's share. That's separate from that Ser Sadibra. So in other words, what the Moshe Zakanim is answering is as follows. The Moshe Zakanim had a good question. He said, is that if the reason why we're zapping this person and piercing the ear is because they stole, why didn't you zap him initially? Or according to that second answer, if the reason why you're zapping him and piercing his ear is because he chose to be an Eved, zap him initially. Why are we waiting until he chose to stay until Yovel? So the Moshe Zakanim is answering because he's got a good, his lawyers could come up with a good defense. Right? Everyone's watching. What kind of defense are Trump's lawyers going to come up with now? So this guy's lawyers could come up with a good defense. Dershowitz could make the claim and say, what? Is that this guy didn't really mean to rebel against Hashem and steal. The only reason he stole was he was so desperate. But now 6 years later, where I'm not desperate, I've paid off my debts, and I've even been given a financial package, I still want to be an Eved? So then why did I steal? It must be, it wasn't about desperation. It must be I'm okay with stealing. So now we're going to pierce your ear. Or the other guy who sold himself. So initially, Dershowitz could come up with an argument and say, the guy didn't want to be an Eved. Desperate times called for desperate situations. But 6 years later, he's not desperate anymore. He's paid up his debts. He's just got a financial package and he still wants to be an Eved. Now we're going to get you. So it sounds like the first time he had a potential defense. It's only after the 6 years have gone by and that defense is gone, only now can we zing him. Only now can we zap him and say, those ears that heard at Sinai and chose to ignore it, they're the part of your body that's gonna get pierced. That's how the Moshe answers this. I thought that was very, very cool. I'm gonna